Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Kelly Crum, Brand and Content Manager for Maryland Realtors. I want to welcome you all to our 2026 Commercial Series webinar. Today, we have with us Maryland Realtors Senior Legal Associate Cleo Pappas and special guest Ashley Rossi with Macro Commercial Real Estate, where together they will delve into the foundational understanding and context of commercial sales and leasing, the letter of intent process, how commercial properties are priced, and key regulatory considerations. We do encourage your questions and we look forward to answering them. Please post all questions in the Q&A box below at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will answer them at the end of this presentation. And with that, I will turn it over to Cleo. Cleo, take it away.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for attending this afternoon, and thank you, Ashley, for being here. I'd like to give her a little bit of an introduction. Ashley Rossi is the Vice President of Macro Commercial Real Estate in Frederick, Maryland. Ashley has worked in the commercial real estate industry since 2010 in the DC metro area. In addition to her work as a commercial real estate agent, Ashley also serves on a number of boards and committees. These boards would include Frederick County Chamber of Commerce, Frederick County Association of Realtors, Mental Health Association of Frederick County, Community Foundation of Frederick County, and the DEI and commercial committees at FCAR and Maryland Realtors. Ashley is currently the board president at the Mental Health Association of Frederick County and Maryland Realtors Executive Committee. In 2022, Ashley was named as Top 50 Under 40 Young Professional in Frederick County and won the Emerging Dealmaker Award from Frederick County Office of Economic Development. In 2022, she also began teaching the basics of commercial for Plan to Pass broker course. Ashley resides in Frederick County with her husband, Jim, and their two children. And I thank you again, Ashley, for agreeing to do this for everybody. We appreciate it, and I can't wait to hear everything you have to offer. And I'll turn it over to you now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cleo. I'm very happy to be here with everybody today. So we are basically going to try to go through this. I typically, when I teach this course, this is a 3-hour course when I teach it on a regular basis. So this is like commercial real estate basics light. So I'm going to run through a couple of things. Like they said, if you do have any questions, I will try to stop throughout the presentation. But if there are a lot of longer questions, we'll hit those sort of towards the end. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So just give me 2 seconds. I'm going to get my screen shared and get the PowerPoint up and going. Okay. So as mentioned, so we are going to go through kind of talking, this is going to probably be a little bit more heavy on the lease side, but we will touch a little bit on kind of the commercial purchase and submitting the letter of intent. We'll look at a sample letter of intent for both a lease and for a purchase and kind of go through the basic things that you need to have in there. So just kind of starting off, we're going to go ahead and just kind of talk about what is commercial real estate. I think everybody probably has a really good idea of what the definition of commercial real estate is, but just in case you don't, it's a property that's used exclusively for business-related purposes or to provide a workspace rather than a living space. So with the exception, of course, of multifamily. And any property that basically isn't considered kind of a residential can fall into a commercial real estate category. So just looking at a couple of the different types of commercial real estate. So I think when people mostly think of commercial, they think of, an office building, retail, and those are the majority, especially of what we see kind of here in Maryland. But there are some other exceptions too. So obviously professional and medical office buildings, warehouse and flex. So if you've probably noticed, depending on what area of Maryland you are in, I know if you're out towards the Frederick, Maryland area or Washington County, you've probably seen a huge increase in warehouse spacing and flex spacing. And for those who don't know, flex space is sort of that one-story space that looks a little bit like it could be. Some of them have drive-up doors in the back, or roll-up doors and drive-ins and dock, but they're one-story spaces that can be used either for a type of warehousing or for offices. There are some businesses that choose to have their regular professional offices that will be in sort of that flex space. And nowadays, they can build them out to look significantly nicer than like a traditional warehouse space. And then obviously we have our kind of high bay warehouse, and those are going to be, your ceiling heights that are about 22 to 30 feet up too as well. And I will add that between 2020 and now, the biggest increase that we have seen on the commercial real estate side, as far as types of properties, has been on the industrial side. That's also where we've seen the most drastic of the price changing. For example, back in about 2018, 2019, you could get a commercial, warehouse space in Frederick for anywhere from about $8 to $10 a square foot. And now fast forward to 2026, the majority of us are doing our deals for those types of spaces at about double that. I think the lowest that I've seen that we've done with a regular on average has probably been about $16 a square foot triple net. So significant price jump. Congratulations to anybody who is still in their space from 2018, because you have a sweetheart deal, and I would say never leave. Um, so then also looking at the other types, so agricultural and land. So this is kind of your development properties, your farms, residential development, commercial development, industrial, and now everyone's favorite, data centers. And then large multifamily and mixed use properties. And then the traditional retail spaces. So, your shopping centers and your mall type of spaces. And then we also have the hospitality, so hotels, and then institutional types of properties, which are going to be your churches, your schools, and your hospitals. So there are a few terms that we're going to go over, and I will do my best to make sure that I break them down. As we're going through all of these terms, I will again, I'll stop and ask for any questions and see if there's any ones that are specific to the slides as we go through. So the terms that we're going to cover in this, like I said, it's going to be a heavy on kind of the leasing side on some of these terms, but we're going to cover what a triple net lease is. So when you see those pricing and you see kind of the NNN, if you're going to do commercial deals, especially commercial leasing, it's very important that you understand what that is, because that plays very heavy into your client's cost. We'll talk about base rent and base rates. We're going to talk about CAM fees, and CAM stands for Common Area Maintenance. Don't worry, I'll break that down too as we go through to the definitions. A modified gross, a full service lease, the difference between usable square footage and rentable square footage. And again, that's another one that's very important to know. A sublease, annual escalations, and then the tenant improvement allowance. So kind of just starting off with the most common one that you're going to see, and this is going to be your different types of leases. So first is going to be your triple net lease. So again, that's the one that when you see it advertised, it will have a number that says maybe, $32/NNN, and those are your triple nets. So it's very important when you're looking at that to understand kind of how that plays into that number. We'll talk about a modified gross lease and then a full service. So starting with the triple net, so basically a triple net lease would mean that all of the expenses that a landlord incurs are going to be passed through into the tenant. So the tenant is going to be basically paying for everything. So as I was saying, when you see the 32 and the NNN, the $32 that you would see would be their base rent number. So that is just the number that is pure for the base rent of the facility. The NNN, which is going to be your triple nets, also known as your pass-through expenses, are going to be a different number that also has to get calculated into your monthly. So if a client comes to you and says that their monthly is, $3,000 a month, that's all they can afford, and that number advertised that says whatever the, $30 a square foot, let's say for 1,200 square feet, that, that's going to be their max number. You're not factoring in the fact that they have triple nets, then you're going to need to go lower on the base number so that you can factor those numbers in. So those expenses would include, like I said, your CAM, which is your common area maintenance. Real estate taxes get passed through to the tenants as well. So if you're in a multi shopping center, everyone's going to have a certain proportionate share of the center that is their responsibility. So that would get passed through. Your condo fees, if there are condo fees, those get passed through. Insurance that the landlord may have for the whole exterior of the property, that gets passed through. There can be additional, sometimes there's additional snow removal. If they had to do a capital improvement project, they're going to put that into that kind of annual budget. So all of those expenses are just, it's important to know and to really get a grasp on those. Also to understand that usually when it comes to negotiation, those expenses are typically non-negotiable, especially the ones that we call uncontrollable expenses. So an uncontrollable expense would be your real estate taxes. As much as we all would love to have control over them, we don't. We can't cap them. It is what it is. It's what the state passes down. So that's something that you really don't have a lot of negotiating room on. So I did kind of just a quick basic so you can see this is a very simple example of how this gets broken down. So they look at their annual expenses. You'll see this 52.42%. That's the proportionate share of whoever this tenant space. So that's kind of what their sizes of that space of that entire center that they're located in. And the way it gets broken down is they have the annual number, and then you've got your monthly number, and then the per square foot. So remember the numbers that we see. Again, I'll go back to kind of when a number is advertised at 32. That's an annual number, not a monthly number. So when you see that again, and you're doing your calculations for clients to figure out how much their monthly is, when they tell you something is, $50 a square foot, just know that is not the monthly, that is the annual. So take that annual number times it, get whatever that is times your space size. So if the space is 3,000 square feet, times that by the 3,000, divide it by 12, and that's how you get your monthly number. So the next would be a modified gross lease. So a modified gross lease means that not every expense is passed through outside of kind of the base rent, that there are some expenses included in that base rent. So for example, some landlords will include water and sewer. They'll say, hey, that's included in the base rent number because we don't want to break that out. So they will include that sometimes, or they'll say, the number I'm advertising for rent in that base rent is also going to include their real estate taxes or also their insurance, but I want them to pay their utilities separate. That would be what we call a modified gross lease because you're modifying the gross number.
Ashley, may I interrupt you very
Yes.
quickly? One of the questions was, isn't maintenance usually included in the triple net lease?
Yes. So there's the common area maintenance, and then if they have any additional repairs and maintenance fee, it depends on the property, but some do break it down for that. Some landlords don't always take have a capital expense set aside, even though they should. And so that would be included as well. Some landlords will ask you to do your own maintenance. I think one thing to remember about all of this is all landlord specific. Nothing is a typical standard because every landlord kind of has their own way of doing things. I had a call with one of my landlords this morning who is used to, the tenant them doing everything for the tenant and the tenant just reimburses them. I have other landlords that say, no, I want the tenant to handle it and pay for it and just let me know what's going on. So we talked about kind of the modified gross and then the full service lease. So the full service lease is what we see a lot when office buildings, where you've got, you could potentially have, 50 plus offices. And so a full service lease means that all of your expenses, every expense that's coming through is included in the number. So if they say it is $25, per square foot full service, that means that that is including everything. That is including the taxes, that is including insurance, that is including your base rent, that's also including your utilities. So like I said, that is a typical for an office building that you would see something like that. I think we're seeing more and more of our offices going to that full service number so that they're not having to, they're getting one electric bill, not having to nitpick everything out. Before we move, were there any additional questions kind of on the different types?
I saw two in the question and answer area, but I think you're answering it, whether or not triple net includes everything and how does it differ from full service?
Yes, so full service, remember, everything is included. Triple net, nothing is included. Everything is passed through. So when you see that base number that's being advertised, that means that there's going to be, when there's triple net, you have to ask what are the additional expenses? Because there will be additional expenses, and they can go anywhere from, being $3 additional per square foot to $15 additional per square foot. I mean, we're seeing retail centers right now anywhere from $10 to $14 a square foot on top of the base rent because they are triple net leases. Full service means the advertised number is everything is included in there.
Almost like a residential in that sense, right?
Yes, yes, except for residential. Actually, residential would be more of a modified gross sometimes because if you think about it, you're paying for your utilities because you'll get your electric bill in your name.
Yeah, good point. And then one last one before you continue, and I'll hold off other questions on the details. Have you ever heard of a triple net? I'm sorry, an absolute triple net.
We have, yes. And then again, it also kind of falls along the same line as a triple net. There's also double net, which to me, double net's more like a modified gross where they're saying we're only passing through um, our real estate taxes and insurance. I think those are the two biggest ones are the real estate taxes and insurance.
And I'll let you move on and then we can answer the rest towards the end.
Okay. All right. So just again, we'll break down a little bit. So common area maintenance. So just kind of understanding what the common area maintenance is. And so that's basically all the common shared areas of the property. So that can be your parking lots, your sidewalks, you're in an office building, you'll have a lobby, your anything kind of on that exterior of the building. There's an elevator and there's elevator maintenance, that's part of the common area expenses. Street lights, all of those types of things are part of kind of whatever's in that common area. The next is really important to kind of understand too, is the difference between a usable square footage and rentable square footage. So usable square footage is the total area of a tenant space. So that means when you go into the space and you actually start measuring every inch of that space, everything kind of within in the walls, that is your usable square footage. The way that rents are based, though, when a landlord is calculating, so a lot of times you'll have someone come in and you'll say, they told me that this space is 3,000 square feet. Well, I went in and I did all the measuring and I'm coming up with it being, 2850 on the square footage. Why is there a difference? Well, that's the rentable square footage because the rentable square footage includes that usable square footage, but it also has a tenant's proportionate share of what the common area is. So if there's more common area, it's usually going to be a little bit higher. So for example, if you again, if you're in like a general office building and you have this huge kind of foyer area and this big lobby area when you walk in and a grand staircase and all these kind of really large kind of common area, all of that kind of gets calculated into being that rentable square footage number. So just know that when a landlord is advertising the number, they're advertising the rentable square footage, not typically the usable square footage. Are there any questions on specific the kind of the CAM, the usable, or the rentable?
I don't see those. I don't know. Do you want me to read some of the questions that may still be out
Yeah,
there?
we can. That's fine.
Okay. Are utilities metered independently in a triple net, or is the landlord reimbursed?
Typically, yes, so depending on the type of space. So if it's a retail space, they'll usually tell you to you'll have your utilities in your name. So if it's, an electric bill, a gas bill, you'll get those utilities in your name. The one that gets a little bit tricky is the water and sewer bill. And so for specifically here in Frederick County, all of those have to go to the landlord. So the landlord either needs to submeter, which they can ask the tenant to do, or what they'll do is they'll just divide it up by all the tenants. So if you have three tenants, let's say, and they're all kind of the similar types of uses, they're not necessarily heavy water users or anything, they'll just kind of divide it up and they'll bill it out to everybody. They'll pay the final and then get reimbursed for that.
And one last one, is modified lease set or can it be negotiable? I.e., can a tenant try to negotiate, yeah, I'll pay this, but no, I won't pay that.
You can try. No, they typically they will have it set. They'll say, look, this is what is included. Everything else you're going to have to pay outside of that. You do have a little bit more flexibility sometimes to negotiate on that because again, it's not like a triple net where it's like you're only negotiating is that base number. Because some of that modified is in that base number, you do have some room to negotiate because it does have that base number in there.
Okay, and then two more that came in. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
So the rentable square footage will usually be more than the usable square footage.
Yes.
Okay.
Because it's including
And
that proportionate share of the common area.
and when RSF, I guess rentable square footage, is calculated, is the shared usable space in the building divided between all tenants to go into the RSF?
Yes, so it's based on the proportionate share. So whatever that percentage of let's say you have 4%, you're 4% of the building, they're using that 4% to kind of calculate what your proportionate share is of those common areas.
Okay.
The real thing to key in on when you're looking at a lease, and it will be written into every lease too, when you get the actual physical lease in hand, make sure you just take a look at what the proportionate shares are, and what that percentage number is.
Okay, I think that was it for right now. Thanks.
Awesome. Yeah, I really appreciate the questions because I can't see anybody, so I just feel like I'm talking to myself. So
Okay,
please
then
feel free
when
to
the
keep.
important ones come through, I will make sure I say excuse me.
Thank you. All right. So the next terms that we're going to look at, so kind of sublease and subletting. So basically, this is when a lessee or tenant, let's say they're having an issue, and or I like to put it in a more positive way. Let's say they won the lottery. And they're like, you know what? I won the lottery. I don't really want to be a part of this business, but because I'm still cheap, I don't want to pay out my lease. I'd like somebody to come in and take over my lease. So that's basically where they would have someone come in and sublease from them for whatever their remaining term is. So let's say they sign a 5-year lease. They win the lottery in year two, and they want someone to come in and take over the remaining 3 years of their lease. Almost every lease will allow for that with landlord approval. So the landlord does still have to approve. They do still have to, they can't unreasonably say no, but they do have to approve for someone to come in and sublease from you. A lot of times that original tenant is still on the lease because they're still part of that. They may still be the guarantor, but they'll have a subtenant in there to kind of sublease from them for whatever that remaining term is. Another thing to talk about is kind of the annual escalation. So rents do escalate annually. This is a negotiable number. I'd say right now in the market, we're typically seeing anywhere from 3 to 4%, is where sometimes you can get lower, especially if the lease is longer. Sometimes you can push off it where you can say, I'm signing a 15-year lease. Every 5 years, I'll increase at, 15%, which is still a 3%. It's just at a different time. The annual escalation, if you're in a triple net lease, the annual escalation is usually, that's already set, is usually just on your base rent. It is not necessarily on your triple nets because your triple nets are all kind of triggered by your budget. So they do go up, but they're not always going to go up at the same percentage as your base rent. Your escalation is mainly based on your base rent. Again, it can be negotiable. You're typically not getting away without having one at all, but it can be negotiable. In a full service and modified, it just goes off of that, again, goes off of that rental number, that base rent number. Full service, because everything is included, it's off of that total number. So if it says it's 26 full service, it's off of that full 26.
One quick question in
Yep.
that previous topic. For original lease lessees, are they still responsible for the remainder on an assignment or a sublease?
Yes. Unless the landlord lets them out for some reason, you are typically, because at the end of the day, the landlord's agreement is with you, with the tenant. The landlord and the tenant, that's the agreement. The sublease tenant has an agreement with the tenant, but the landlord at the end of the day, the money has to come from the tenant. So if the sublet tenant's not paying for some reason, they're, whatever, they've decided, the landlord's coming after you. They're not coming after the subtenant, because at the end of the day, you're still responsible for it.
And then two quick things that you'll probably cover a little later. How is compensation dealt with in residential, I'm sorry, in commercial leases like residential? And if you have any other sites other than maybe CoStar or Bright MLS to use for looking at properties in the commercial arena.
Yeah, we'll push those towards the end because those are a little more general. We'll stay topic tight right now. But we can answer those. If you don't mind, just we'll rekey those up towards the end of because I do have a questions part in here. So we can definitely answer some of those. All right. So the last kind of on this page that we'll look at is talking about that tenant improvement allowance. And so this is a certain amount of money that a landlord will give to a tenant to help with their build out. Basically, I don't like to say give because no money is free, but they will loan it to a tenant at the front of the lease or at some point during while they're doing their build out to help assist with a tenant's build out. So that number can be anywhere. A lot of times it's either a whole number, so they'll say, we'll give you $30,000 or $60,000 towards your build out, or they'll say it'll be off of a certain percentage of the square foot. So, or not percentage, but off the square footage. So $20 a square foot, $30 a square foot. A lot of times what a landlord will do is when they're giving that number, they're going to amortize it. So they're going to break it down over the base of your initial lease term. So obviously the longer the lease term, let's say you take $60,000, the longer your lease term is, that's a lower number to get spread out over that 60,000 for the landlord to get paid back. Again, super negotiable. It really kind of depends a lot what the condition of the space is in. If it's, if it's a turnkey ready to go space there, you may not get a tenant improvement allowance. If it's a new, it's a gravel ground spot, they're probably going to have some tenant allowance that they're already working into their numbers to be able to give that to you. I think there were there any questions on the tenant improvement?
I don't see those right now.
Okay. All right. So just give me 2 seconds. I'm going to switch because we're going to look at a sample of what a letter of intent, and this will also have a little bit of that language. I can tap into the compensation question too as well through that. But we'll look at a letter of intent for a lease, and then we're also going to look at one for purchase, and we'll go through some of the terms that are in the purchase one too as well. So just give me 2 seconds. I'm going to switch my screens.
We do have two questions that came in. I'm
Okay.
sorry,
Yeah,
regarding
go ahead.
tenant improvements. Is tenant improvement amortized amount built into the monthly rent? And is the TA typically ever a no charge to the tenant, in your opinion?
What was the second? I'm sorry. Of course, today is the day they decide to landscape behind me.
That's all right.
What was the second?
The second question is the TA typically ever a no charge to the tenant, in your opinion?
When you say no charge, I'm assuming you mean, do they typically not amortize, or is it sometimes not amortized back into it? Occasionally. So again, if it depends on the condition of the space, like if there's a new space, like if it's a brand new gravel ground space, then the landlord may say, hey, it's a 32, $32 a square foot base rent, and we're giving you 60K towards your build out because obviously there's nothing here. We know you need to build it out. So in that case, they're not technically amortizing it back because they've already worked it into their numbers to give you that amount of money there. Depending on how strong your rate is too. I mean, if you're paying the asking, again, sometimes they're more willing to do that. But if you're, I typically tell my clients when we're negotiating on spaces, I say we got to look at we got to look at three key areas. What are and we got to put them in order of what's more important. So we look at the base rent, we look at the tenant improvement, and then we look at the rent abatement, which rent abatement is like the free rent period. So when I'm talking with my clients, I say, what's more important in order, kind of what are your importance levels? Is it more important for you to have the lowest rent you possibly can have? And if they say yes, and I say, okay, so the lowest rent you possibly can have, if that's what you're going for, then that means that you basically need to ask the landlord for pretty much nothing, saying, hey, look, I'm willing to take this on. I'm going to take it as is, but I want you to give me the lowest rent. And usually, if someone says that, then we're also looking at rent abatement, saying, we want you to offset some of our costs by giving us free rent to allow us to do this. If someone says, hey, look, I don't want to go to get any more money for my build out. I don't want to go get an SBA loan. I want to see if the landlord will give me the max, and I don't mind if they're going to up my rent or get me the highest rent. I'm okay with that. Then that's where we would go to the landlord and say, look, we need, $100,000 towards a build out.
Right. So I think you answered the next two questions, which were, is the allowance given to the tenant at the front part? And then in this market, are you seeing free rent offered in the early stages?
So is the allowance is given, it depends on how it's negotiated. So occasionally what they will say, the most typical that we see is that a landlord will either do a reimbursement. So meaning after a certain period of the job is done, that they'll, when you get an invoice and pay, then you submit that to the landlord and they'll reimburse you. Sometimes they'll say, I'll give you 50% on the front end, but they still want receipts because what they want to make sure you're doing is you're using that money for work. They don't want it. So it's like, hey, we're just going to write you a check for 50K. Best of, enjoy. They want to know that you're giving money to help improve their space. A lot of times they will not allow you. They'll put parameters too around what that money can be used for. So they'll say sometimes like, it can be used for any improvements and upgrades to the space, but it can't be used for furniture or it can't be used towards, certain rent. So it really kind of depends as far as how it's negotiated on when that money is available to the tenant.
Okay. And then the other follow-up question is the tenant improvement amortized amount built into the monthly rent?
Yes.
You answered that. And then one, I'm not quite sure, Deidre, I apologize. Are these commercial spaces use specific, i.e. daycare versus retail, et cetera, or is it the landlord's choice? I'm not sure what specific question that was related to.
Yeah, are you asking if it's whoever?
Deidre, if you can rewrite your question, then we can answer it, I guess.
And then there was a question about about abatement. Um, yes, we are definitely seeing abatement still. Again, abatement kind of goes with however long your lease is. The longer your lease term, usually the more abatement. What you're going to see, and you'll actually see this right now. I've got the letter of intent pulled up, and let me make this bigger. Let me figure out how to make this bigger. There we go. So everybody can see that a little bit better. But a lot of times what we'll do with abatement too is we'll add it to the back end of the lease. So we're saying, hey, look, you're still going to get your pure. So looking at this LOI, you're still getting your pure 10 years as a landlord. We're asking for an 8-month abatement on the front end, but we're moving it to the back. So you're still getting your full term. We're just almost asking just for a little bit of shift. If it's a brand, like if it's a new space, I just had clients that were doing a build out. And so we did some negotiating so that they wouldn't start even their rent abatement. So their lease technically wouldn't commence until they got permits in hand to start opening up their doors. And then that's when that time would kick in because we knew that they needed at least 3 months or so to get their build out done. So I think, again, the one thing to remember is everything is negotiable. I highly recommend that if you're not in commercial and you're thinking about doing commercial, that you start off with maybe referring to an agent. I have residential agents I work with all the time who will refer to me and will ask, hey, do you mind if I just kind of hang out and kind of be on the emails and be a part of it and kind of understand it? Because you're almost doing your clients just like you'll never find me negotiating on a house. I won't even do my own because I that's not my area of expertise. And I don't know what I don't know. So it's always helpful to have an agent there that's willing to work with you or willing to say, hey, you can tag along. Yep, you're referring it to me, but if you want to be a part of this, you're more than welcome to, so you can get a better understanding because I've been doing this now for almost 15 years, which is crazy since I'm only 29. Um, but you see all different types of things. And so the experience is so helpful in this industry, just like it is, I'm sure, in the residential industry. You've seen so many different things. All right. All right, so we're going to go through. This is a letter of intent for a lease. So it's very basic. And the reason we do letter of intents, which are basically proposals. The reason we start with this is because number one, it's non-binding. So we don't typically require an attorney to review this. And so it really helps to save our clients some money too, as well, because it's usually written by the agent. The other reason too is it gives us an opportunity to kind of give our proposed terms and for all of us to kind of go back and negotiate. We usually send this in Word version. Everybody redlines and marks it up and changes things back and forth. And then when everyone has come to an agreeable term, then each party will sign, and then we use that to move forward and create the legal document, which would be the lease. So I'm a huge fan of the letter of intent. Again, I think it saves a lot of time and energy and money for people too as well. So that's part of the reason why we ask for these to be submitted. So this is, again, like I said, this is a very, very basic kind of letter of intent, just kind of giving you the kind of key points of things that you're going to need to have in there. So of course you're going to want the property address, so you know which property you're talking about. You'll have the tenant's name, the landlord's name, then the initial term. So like I was kind of saying, this is a 10-year, 8-month term because we were asking for 8 months of rent abatement on the front end. And so we usually will typically try to add that to the back end because it does make it more attractive. And you're sometimes a little more likely to get a landlord to agree to it if they know that they're going to get their full term anyway. You're just asking to shift kind of the rent. So here's where we'll put kind of the square footage. And then there's three kind of things to remember that you'll have your lease execution date, you have a lease commencement date, and then you have a rent commencement date. So your lease execution is the day that the lease is signed. So that means all parties have agreed, it's dated, that is the day that the legal document is signed. That is your lease execution date. That doesn't always mean that's when the lease starts or commences. So like I was saying, when I had with clients, if they have build outs that I know that they're going to have to do, we typically will ask for the lease not to actually commence until they've received their permits. Because that permit process, as many of us know, can go anywhere from, 90 days to sometimes 120 days, depending on how quickly things are moving. So we will typically ask them, you don't want to waste any of your rent abatement time. If you get 8 months of free rent, the last thing you want to do is waste your entire 8 months on just waiting for the government to give you your permits from, the county or the city or whatever your municipality is to give you permits. So we will always ask if we can commence the date kind of closer to when we get those permits. Then we have our proposed rent that we're putting in there. And then the date that the rent commences would be the first date that they are actually paying rent. So that would be after we had that 8 months of rent abatement, then you would have when the rent actually commences. These dates are really important too, because going to the compensation part, these are around the times that you may potentially be getting your payment as well. Because a lot of times we don't get paid right on the front end. We get paid specifically, sometimes when the lease is signed, you'll get maybe half there, and then you may get the next half when the tenant starts paying rent. So that could be a year from when they actually have signed the lease. All right. And so one thing to remember too is during abatement, if you're in a triple net lease, during that rent abatement period, while you will be, your base rent will be, so the big number will be abated that you won't technically be paying for. You will usually be paying for the triple net. So that's those triple net expenses, that common area real estate, all that, whatever that monthly comes out to monthly, and your utilities during that abatement period. You just typically abate the base rent.
I do have two quick questions.
Yep.
What happens if the county does not approve permits? Can you get released from the lease? And what language is used to communicate the rent commencement date that begins after permits? Is there not specific permit receipt date? Do you have
There's a
to?
legal document usually in the lease that doesn't get signed until it actually commences. There'll be the regular lease, and then in the lease there will typically be a agreement of commencement. That once the permits are in hand, that's when or whenever they decide that's the commencement, both the landlord and the tenant will sign, and then that gets incorporated into the lease later on. And then if you don't get your permits for some reason, it depends on, this is why it's so important to have a good representation, because it really depends on how you negotiate it. So again, for me personally, I have no problems calling the county and the city before we even get through a letter of intent, asking them to come out and take a look at a space and say, hey, let me know, obviously you can't say yay or nay, but what red flags do you see right now? What red flags do you see that we're going to have to potentially, could potentially keep them from getting it? I typically try to ask people to put in, a clause. We just did this for a medical space, and we're doing a change of use. It's usually when you have a change of use that you're going to see that be a bigger hurdle. And we're changing it from, it was a retail and we're changing it into a medical. And we put in a timeline saying if they did not get the permits in hand within, I think we put 120 days or something like that, then they were able to be released from the lease without penalty. So I would say if you think it's going to be an issue, so if you're doing some type of a change of use or something that you haven't already started exploring, then I would highly recommend that you would put that in there into your lease. Again, that's going to be case by case. It's not going to be necessary for every single deal.
Okay. And so this follow-up question comes from earlier, but it kind of fits in here. So is the space zone specifically in a multi-use for a building, i.e. if they need to find space for a daycare in a building that houses retail or auto repair, et cetera, is it landlord's choice or zone choice? How does that play into everything?
So we'll go through that too a little bit because I do have, if we have time, we'll go through some of that stuff. But so the zoning is going to be the overall for the actual parcel, the whole parcel of the property, not specific to this unit is zone this unit zone that. Where you come into where it's the specific is in the uses. So one thing is it within the zoning? Yes. Yes, you can do a daycare in the zoning. Okay, well, this space before um, was a grocery store. But we want to make it into a child care facility. So then you're just going to have to go to the county and say, hey, look, we want to make this into a child care. This is going to be what's called a change of use. So just know zoning and change of use, two different things, but still need to work hand in hand. So it's allowed in the zoning, but it's going to be a change of use. So when you're changing the use, they may require, most likely they will require, I never use absolutes with the government because they change their mind every 10 minutes, but they may require you to have certain code requirements to bring it up. So let's say that grocery store has been in there for, and we're not talking a big grocery store, let's say a 10,000 square foot grocery store. Let's say they've been in there for years and years and years. They were grandfathered in forever. It's always been a grocery store. It's never been anything else. Let's say they don't have a sprinkler system, or they don't have, they only have two bathrooms, two individual stalled bathrooms. To get the change of use for daycare, they will come in and they may say, okay, if you want to have the change of use, the zoning is fine, but the change of use, you need to add a sprinkler system. You're going to need to add more additional bathrooms to match your occupancy that you're trying, your max occupancy. You may need another form of egress. You may need whatever, it'll be specific to what the use is, but it's really going to be in that change of use that you're going to have to really look tightly at those requirements.
There are a couple more follow-ups, but let's continue and we can get to them at
Okay.
the end.
So we'll run through this pretty quickly. So again, rent escalation, we talked about that. That's going to be something you're going to want to put in there. Delivery of the premises. So kind of how the landlord is turning it over to your tenant. Depending on the condition is really where this is going to come in. So for this one, this was a lease that we were doing for a space that was getting subdivided, and so we were asking for the landlord to basically deliver us a warm lit shell, which means the HVAC units are already in place. The lighting is in place. That's what the lit is. So the warm is the HVAC. The lit is the light. And then we asked them to do the rough-ins for the plumbing, saying we would put the fixtures in, but if you could just rough in the lines, things like that. HVAC units are something to really take a hard look at. I typically have all of my clients get an HVAC inspection. It's a few $100s, but it's worth it because you need to know the condition of the HVAC. Because unlike in a residential deal or in a residential lease, if that HVAC unit breaks or something happens, typically, unless it's written differently in the lease, typically it's going to be on the tenant unless you've negotiated it differently. So just something to keep in mind, HVAC units, and this is where we see a lot of people when they start negotiating without an agent or without someone that has the expertise in that, they really get caught up in that problem because their HVAC unit breaks and they're thinking, oh, well, it's just like, if I was renting a house, I'm going to call the landlord. And the landlord says, hey, read your lease. It's not my responsibility. You got to replace that. So again, always good to know. Tenant improvement allowance you'll put in there, security deposit. Other thing you'll add that I don't see in here is that it may not be in this. If you're going to have a renewal, you'll want to put the renewal in that letter of intent as well. And then just identifying who the brokers are. All right. And then we will quickly run through this one. So this one's just the purchase one. So again, we do letter of intents for purchases as well. So these get a little bit more detailed for the purchase agreements, but not, again, it's still non-binding. It's just they're a little bit more detailed for the type. So you've got your purchase price and your deposit. If there's contingencies, your feasibility period. For those who don't know it, a feasibility period is basically, in short, it's kind of the free look period. So you've already signed the contract, everything's been agreed to, but now you want to go in and do some inspections. You want to get an appraisal done. Maybe you're trying to line up your financing, everything. You get a feasibility period of anywhere, typically it's anywhere from, on average, anywhere from 30 to 90 days, depending on the property and the condition of the property. If it's land, it's usually longer. This is an example of one that was land, so this one's a little bit longer. But that's kind of your time to go in where your deposit's not at risk. So the deposit's sitting in escrow, but anytime during that 180 days, as it says here, it's fully refundable. On day 181, it becomes non-refundable. So you want to make sure you get everything you can during that time. Also, if there's any approvals, entitlements, permits, things like that for this that you're going to need for the property, you want to try to get all of that done within that time too. Your financing, again, brokerage fees, a lot of times we do because yes, we're paid by, let's say, the landlord or the seller, but we do separate brokerage agreements between broker and broker because technically we're being paid by the broker that out of whatever they have negotiated with their client. And then obviously we ask for it to be confidential. And I'm flying through this because I do want to make sure we have time for your questions too, guys. So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. And then we try to set a timeline to say we're going to get you the contract or they're going to get us the contract in a certain time frame. Those contracts, just like leases, are written by attorneys. I have a couple of base contracts that I can use for simple deals. And just like I have base leases I can use for simple deals. But I always, even if I'm doing just the filling in and kind of getting it, I always have everything reviewed by an attorney because every contract and every lease is different. There are no identical leases or contracts. There's no just identical general language. So if you are thinking about getting into commercial or you're doing it now, your best friend should be an attorney.
Do the attorneys write the LOIs as well, or just
Yeah,
you do?
we do. Yeah. Yeah, so the LOIs, that's why they're non-binding. Can attorneys write LOIs? Absolutely. But we typically do the LOI, again, non-binding, and because it saves money, because we don't have to pay an attorney to do that. All right. Any questions?
There are a few.
Okay, let me see where
So
we,
is the feasibility period akin to the inspection contingency period in a residential real estate transaction? Hmm.
yes, I would say, except it's significantly longer. And it's again, your deposit is fully refundable during that time period.
And then we have a question regarding whether you have a buyer tenant agreement in place as well. So that's an agency question.
Um, so do you mean like a tenant representation agreement, I'm assuming is what you're
Yeah, I think that's the question. Do you have a buyer slash tenant agreement?
You can. It really depends. We don't typically, it's not a requirement for us to have them on our side. And I mean, I've used them with some tenants before. To be quite honest, if you don't want to really work with me, I'm not going to hold you to it because I probably don't want to work with you either at that point. But yes, they are available. Some agents do use them, but I'd say probably now we're seeing maybe 50% or so. We more do obviously a listing agreement for if we're representing a seller or if we're representing a landlord as opposed to if we're representing a tenant.
And then we had a couple of compensation questions regarding how the licensees get paid, whether for a lease or for a sale in commercial.
Well, sales going to be just like a residential. You get paid at closing. So that's sales are just when it comes to that part of it, sales are the same. Again, going back to kind of what I said before about with those kind of benchmark dates of, your rent commencement, your lease commencement. It really just depends. There is no deal where I can say, yep, every single one has always been like this. Sometimes there are landlords that will say, we'll pay you 50% on when the lease gets executed. I have one deal I'm in right now where they say, once they get their permits, we'll pay you 50%, and then you'll get the remaining when they actually open their doors for business or when their rent commences. So that can be sometimes anywhere from 6 months to a year. I may have a deal right now that the business will open up in the spring. They signed their lease in December 2024. So I'll get my second half of the payment finally in, the spring of this year.
And then the follow-up to that is who pays?
Typically the landlord, if that's what the agreements are.
Right. And then another question, have you dealt with owners trying to pay the tenant's broker on a monthly amount until the commission is paid, even though the tenant is paying the rent? If so, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I have one right now that does it, and it's very difficult. It's a hard one for us to co-broker with because it's hard for me to tell another agent, hey, look, just want to let you know you're going to get paid monthly over the next 5 years. Um, so we typically take that on a case by case. It's a much easier if I'm the only agent involved. Like for this landlord in particular, it typically because of the type of property it is, we don't co-broker a lot because a lot of people just come to us directly. So it makes it easy, but I've been getting paid monthly for the last 9 years on a deal. So hopefully I'll never leave my brokerage.
I can understand that. So I will answer this question. How much do tenant buyer agents get paid, percentages, etc.? So obviously you cannot answer that question on this type of webinar. So
Yes, that is a question between you and your broker.
I don't know if you have any other follow-ups. Those are the last of the questions that I can see that we not
Perfect.
have not addressed. Oh, one more. I see one just came in. What type of financial documents should a tenant be prepared to present?
I'm so glad you asked because that is actually my very next slide. So I have like two more slides. So just bear with me. And that is literally my next one is actually about qualifying a prospect because that is super, super important. All right. Oops. All right. So if you have a client, they say they like the space, you're ready to prepare a letter of intent for them. I typically try to get the whole package together and submit. However, you want to make sure they know. So things you're going to need, financials are important. Financials are key. Especially with a lease. I mean, it's just like if you were going, I tell my clients, prepare like you were going to the bank to ask for a loan. So they're typically going to want, if it's a business that is over 5 years old, or has, you've had some really good revenue, let's say in the last 2 years or whatever, typically over 5 years old, they're going to say, we want to have the last 2 to 3 years of your business financials. Um, However, if it's a new business, if it's, brand new, this is just, they're just starting out, then they are going to want to see your personal financials. So that's going to be recent bank statements. So your bank statements, they don't need 2 to 3 years of your bank statements, but they're going to want to probably see the last 4 months and then your current bank statements. And just so everybody knows, they don't base their negotiating as far as like, oh, I see this person has $100,000. I'm not giving them any, they can afford the rent. They don't base it off of that at all. They basically just want to feel comfortable that while you're if you're paying for a build out, if you're getting the business up and running, that you have money to pay the rent while you're still trying to build your business. The other thing is a business plan is key, especially if it's a business that's less than 5 years old. Please, please, please have a business plan. I have reviewed, rewritten. I never in a million years thought I would be writing as many business plans and reviewing as many for businesses I don't even, but there are so many business plan templates out there. They need to have a business plan prepared. They need to have financials prepared in the business plan and projections. That is important to a landlord. I always tell clients, if you're signing a 5-year lease, project out for 5 years. If you're signing a 10-year lease, try to project out for 10 years. They want to know that you truly understand the business, and make it realistic. And know, they need to know kind of too, this kind of falls into the next. It's really important to know what the budget and the space requirements are because knowing, and I really hone down, you'll have plenty of people that will say to you like, oh, well, let's see the space and then I'll decide if I can afford it. Or, well, I'll kind of look at it. Well, I mean, there's a big difference between $2,000 a month and $20,000 a month. So it's really important to kind of hone in on where that budget number is and also where their space requirements are too, as well. And understanding if they can go a little bigger or a little smaller. Because sometimes, I had a client that wanted 3,000 square feet, but they were only going to be there for 3 years. Well, we happened to find their forever space, which was a 7,000 square foot space. And while it was high on their budget end for them starting out, we signed a 10-year lease. I got them 8 months of abatement. We got a lower stepped rent in the beginning so that their rent started low and then would increase higher on the back end kind of as their business grew. And they are now in year 7 in their forever home. So sometimes if you really have a good understanding, I mean, I always tell my clients, I'm a former collegiate athlete, so everything in my mind is a team. And I always tell my clients we're a team. Like we got to finish, like we have to work as a team to get to the finish line as a team. Checking your zoning when you're looking at properties too, making sure you understand the zoning and understand what type of zonings your client can go into. And also if there's any sort of ways, loopholes for them to be able to go into a certain zoning, meaning can they get a text amendment? Can they get something else, maybe try to go through, I wouldn't say a rezoning because unless you have deep pockets and you're willing to wait it out, that's when rezoning comes into play. You can't just walk in and say, hey, you know what? I think I'm going to rezone that properly. That's a whole nother fun party in itself. Preparing your client for a personal guarantee. That is almost a non-negotiable in most leases right now. Unless you are a massive company, you're going to have to sign a personal guarantee. So just prepare your clients. And even if their spouse doesn't own their business, but they own their assets together, a house, bank accounts, whatever, the spouse is signing that personal guarantee as well. So those are typical non-negotiable. I usually have that conversation with people right on the front end, so there's no surprises. And then also, again, adding to our team is, getting a bank, CPA, some type of financial person that's there to talk to them about what their options are for financing. Maybe the landlord says, I'll give you 50,000 towards your build out, but your build out's 250,000. Well, how are you going to make up that gap? So an SBA loan may be a great way. So I'm going to stop sharing there because if there are any other questions, I know I can go over for a few minutes if there are any additional questions because I know we only have I think 90 seconds left.
All right, we do only have 90 seconds left. And for those people who do want to stay on, if you're okay with it for just a few more minutes, and we'll do the last of the questions, I will let everybody know before they go if you have to go at 2 o'clock. Laura's put up our commercial real estate symposium that's coming up on Thursday, March 26th. Today is the last day for your early bird pricing. So get in on it today and not have to pay more later. I will say so myself that this is a jam-packed, excellent program that we have set up for commercial real estate. We have loads of CE, lots of great speakers. Check it out on our website. It is going to be an excellent day, and you will get a lot of information for your commercial real estate business. And come on down and see us. It's going to be a great event. I will also respond to everybody asking about the slides and the presentation. This will be on the Maryland Realtor YouTube channel within just a few days, so you can rewatch everything and look at the slides all over again. So that will be at your fingertips in a few short days. For the follow-up questions, we do have just a few. I will go back to the one that says, under what scenarios does it benefit the tenant to have the rent abatement added to the back end? It was explained why this would be more attractive to the landlord than a front end abatement.
Because it gives them the time at the front end. So if a landlord says, look, I'm not giving you any abatement up front because I want my 10 years, then it gives you that time though to build up your business. Because again, at the end of your 10 years, hopefully your business is stronger than when you started at the beginning. So it's kind of just a negotiation. It doesn't just benefit the landlord. It benefits the landlord by them getting their full 10 years. It benefits you by getting 8 months of your rent free at the front end.
Next question. Do commercial leases allow early termination prior to the end of the lease term? If yes, can you speak to the general provisions as to notice period and compensation to landlord for early termination?
Again, it's one of those things that is also, it really is a case by case basis. Again, sublease is really the best option sometimes in that case, because then you don't have to pay a buyout. A buyout, every landlord is different in what their buyout, and it also depends on the term you have left. So some landlords will say, look, I want you to pay 50% of what's left on your lease. And I also want reimbursement. So if they gave you tenant improvement, I want whatever's left over from that unamortized tenant improvement that you haven't paid. I want that paid back. I want they'll prorate kind of whatever they paid out in real estate commissions. They may ask for that back, and they'll give it to you as one lump sum buyout. But again, it's case by case, so that's typically what happens, but not always.
Next question. Do property owners use the asset depreciation range to amortize different components of tenant improvement work?
Occasionally they do. Typically they're going to just use whatever the lease term is, and because they're giving you just the full lump sum of money. They're not necessarily looking at the specific work unless they're doing it, but typically they're giving you the full lump sum of money, so they'll just do it kind of in their own amortization chart. However, on occasion it is done the other way.
The other question I will answer in part myself regarding somebody who's looking for advice in a question that the broker they currently have does not do commercial real estate, but they have a residential broker that they're currently working with. Can they find another broker to do commercial and still continue working with their residential? Technically speaking, yes. MREC will allow you to have two different licenses, one residential, one commercial, with two different brokers, as long as both brokers understand and know. So I don't know if you've had that experience, Ashley.
I've had a lot of people who have asked about that because we are a commercial brokerage. I will say it does get a little muddy depending on the type of commercial. So we do residential land development too as well, and we'll sell lots. Like I've sold a couple of large lot communities here in Frederick. I don't sell physical houses, but I do the development of the land. And that can get a little bit kind of a hairy situation, because while that kind of falls into what we're doing with commercial, a residential broker can say, hey, wait, that's a residential too. I want that portion. So it can get a little muddy. So I think it's just kind of making sure it's just very, very clear where everything is going to fall.
Another question I will sort of answer as well. What is a personal guarantee? That's when you agree to you yourself personally paying for any of the funds, rents, debt, etc., that you're taking on as an entity. So you're just saying, if my entity can't pay, I personally will. And usually they are included in commercial leases as well.
Yeah.
And
I see that somebody asked.
people...
I was going to say, and I can see the Q&A now that I
Okay.
stopped sharing my screen. Somebody asked about it being, if they're ever, how likely is it to be waived? Incredibly unlikely, unless unless you've got a $1 million company. It's especially since, I'd say probably since 2009-ish or so. It's unlikely it's going to be.
I don't know if there are any other pressing questions that you'd like to answer that you can see, but
I think someone just asked about who pays for the attorney to review. Each person pays for their own.
One last question I do want to follow up. Any other sites other than Bright MLS, and what certifications or education would you be getting if you had to pursue commercial real estate now?
CoStar is the one that we use mainly. That's kind of our go-to. CoStar also owns LoopNet. The one thing you have to remember though is that CoStar charges us an arm and a leg already. I mean, we've got three or four brokers on it here, and we're close to $3,000 a month for CoStar. And then we also have to pay for LoopNet additional on top of everything, which is about another $2,000. So again, it's really good to have if you almost need it's a requirement for commercial, but that's typically what we use as CoStar. It lets us really get a lot of the data and information. It's kind of our Bright MLS. Unfortunately, but fortunately, it's not as regulated as Bright MLS, so we are not required to mark when things close. We are not required to remove things. So there will be things listed that are already off the market sometimes.
Well, thank you very much, Ashley, for that really informative session. Lots of great tidbits and basics and high detail and other things as well. So wonderful job. Thank you so much. I'm sure everybody who attended got a lot out of this. Thank you very much for answering all the questions. I apologize if I interrupted too much, but I do want to reiterate again, our appreciation for you coming on today and taking your time out to educate everybody. Thank you from Maryland Realtors and all the attendees. And remember, everybody, today's the last day. We have our commercial real estate symposium coming up next month. It is a do not miss event. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you again, Kelly and Laura, for also assisting. And I hope everybody has a wonderful day and hope to see you soon, Ashley.
Awesome. Thank you. And hope to see everyone at the symposium. I'll be there as well.
Awesome.
Thank you, Ashley.
Thanks. Have a good day.
Have a good day.